Hello and welcome to Rajya Sabha Television. You're watching The Big Picture with me, Frank Pereira. With the GST Council approving the remaining two draft bills, the UT GST and the SGST, all the five enabling draft bills stand approved to enable a likely rollout of the new indirect tax regime from July 1st this year. The other three draft laws, the Central GST, Integrated GST and Compensation draft laws, have already been approved by the Council. The SGST draft law will now have to be approved by the legislative assemblies of states and union territories. With the approval of the five draft laws, the legislative action of the GST Council will be over, after which there will be another meeting for fitment of the goods and services in the tax slabs. On this edition of The Big Picture, we'll take a look at the possible challenges ahead and the implementation phase of the GST. Joining me on the program today are A.K. Bhattacharya, Editorial Director of the Business Standard, Ajay, former Secretary, Ministry of Commerce and Industry, Seshadri, Chari, National Executive Member of the BJP, Yatish, Rajawat, Policy Analyst, and Tarun, Jain, Principal Attorney, BMR Legal. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining me on this edition of The Big Picture. Mr. Dua, I'd like to start with you, of course. Is it safe to start talking about the implementation phase of the GST as of now, or do you believe that there could still be some hurdles?
I think the legal hurdles, particularly on the legislative front, to me, seem to be more or less over. This is not to say that we can take all the states for granted, that their assemblies would approve the two or the state GST bill. And in the case of Jammu and Kashmir, it is not only the state GST bill, but they also have to approve the CGST as well as the IGST, because the Constitution itself allows Jammu and Kashmir to have imposed minutes. Central government cannot impose even the taxes there. Having said that, I would say, one, over the months, or if not the years, it's now being increasingly dawning upon every political party that they should not be seen to be opposing a legislation which is otherwise progressive and is required in the country.
Sure.
Second, the most recent electoral victory for the BJP in the provinces, particularly the northern province of UP and Uttarakhand, has also in some ways endorsed the endeavors of the UP in the economic front, the changes which they were wanting to bring about. So to that extent, I think it's now difficult for anyone to be seen to be opposing it, and I would even say that not even Kerala and Bengal and Delhi, who were earlier coming in the way of some of these issues, particularly in the central GST Council, they would also now probably go along with all the legislation changes which have been suggested by the Council and which now go to the respective states.
Indeed. Mr. Chari, I'd like to bring you in now. Do you believe that post these recently concluded 5 state elections, of course, that the political opposition for the GST has receded, or do you believe that there are still going to be several challenges that the BJP needs to tackle now?
No, see, there may not be as many legal hurdles and political challenges. I don't think there was any political challenge, major political challenge, or even a legal hurdle as far as GST was concerned. Even when the whole GST system was tried to be introduced by the UPA government, there was not a major political challenge as much as there was an economic challenge of implementation and challenge of sharing the collection. Most importantly, see, we should not forget that GST is probably one of the most strategic economic reform movement that is happening to this country since independence. So it's a remarkable progress that we are making. So this has dawned on all the state governments as well as the central government. But unlike the local taxes, GST is essentially a destination-based tax. So by virtue of being a destination-based tax, manufacturing states stand to lose. That was the argument of all the manufacturing states. In fact, when BJP ruled, Gujarat was also against this only on the basis of the fact that as a manufacturing state I am losing out. So GST accrues at a stage where the consumption is made. So how do you share the consumption tax? So these were all the issues, and those issues have been reconciled now. So I don't see any major political or legal hurdle, but when it comes to implementation, there will be some teething trouble, no doubt about it.
Indeed, indeed. Mr. Bhattacharya, as far as the SGST is concerned, do you believe that the state legislative assemblies are now going to pull up some hurdles and, stop the state GSTs from being passed?
No, I don't entirely agree with you, but let me put your question in context. There were three kinds of hurdles that we actually we can think of in the successful rollout of GST from July 1. One was the political hurdle, and I think we can safely say, especially after the election result, that the political environment has changed quite dramatically. And I don't see, as Mr. Dua was saying, no state like even Delhi, Kerala and West Bengal which were opposing, the voices have completely died down. So the political challenge is over. The second challenge was...
Before you get to your second challenge, do you believe that July 1st is still manageable? Will we meet the July 1st deadline?
I will come to the July 1 deadline when I give you my third answer, because that is where the July 1 answer lies.
Sure, fair enough.
The second challenge was the legislative challenge, which is what you have asked, which is, can those laws, the state laws, be passed by all the 29 states and the union territories before, in good time, so that it can be rolled out by July 1. Now, the trick here is that if these laws are not passed by the states and there's in a special session or a special reference is made, if they are not done, the states will be the losers. Having been part of the GST Council and endorsed the idea of GST, now the ball is in the court of the states. So even if they have no session coming up before June or May or April, I think it will be in the interest of these states to somehow convene a special session to just pass that bill, so that each state can actually take the necessary preparatory steps to roll it out. Because other states roll out and you don't roll out, you have a problem. Number three is the bigger challenge, which is what you referred to, that whether July 1 is possible or not, which is the administrative challenge. And I do believe that in terms of the administrative challenge, there's a lot of groundwork to be covered. GSTN, which is going to be the technological platform which will implement and will create those set-off and payments and everything, the entire nationwide platform will be there. Now GSTN is saying that they are on target, but my sense is that unless the rules are framed, and that those rules will be framed by the officials committee, unless the duty slabs and the duty rates are finalized, the GSTN backbone and the platform cannot be tested and operationalized. So to my mind, whether July 1 is a possibility depends how well we take on the administrative challenge, particularly in the context of today's statement by the Jammu and Kashmir Finance Minister, Dr. Hasib Drabu, to say that it is in the larger interest of a proper, smooth rollout of GST if it is postponed by 2 months further.
Sure.
So Dr. Hasib Drabu is asking for 2 months further because he says that states must get a clear 6 months window. He is hoping that by April, by March end, everything will be sorted out.
What happens to the constitutional deadline then?
September 16th is the constitutional deadline.
Sure.
So if you roll out on September 1, you are through.
Sure.
So this is what exactly we had discussed in some of our earlier shows.
Indeed.
That there will be further pressure to postpone, and lo and behold, the Jammu and Kashmir Chief Minister, Finance Minister has said, let us postpone.
Yatish, Rajawat, is that the right way to go forward? We waited this long for GST to become a reality, and it looks like it's on its final step, final yard to becoming a reality. Why don't we wait for 2 more months and ensure that it's properly implemented by September?
So, till now, most corporates also thought that, it will get postponed to September. So, I don't know how ready even the corporates are to link up to the GST network. I still, I believe that even the small and medium-sized companies, they're not fully ready. And in these slabs, they also have to specify the products, which is what rate will they fall under. And there is going to be a little bit of lobbying around that too. So whenever the corporate lobbying catches up, you know that there would be a delay in the system. So the political and the legal challenge is over. There is an infrastructure challenge, which is the GST network, and in line with that is the corporate capability and readiness challenge. So while Hasib Babu and the Finance Minister Jain is saying that the state ready or not, are the corporates ready enough to link up to the GST network? That's I think the much bigger issue.
Sure, fair enough. Tarun, Jain, are we going to see some kind of a conflict of interest between this, the central laws and the state laws as far as the GST is concerned? What do you expect on that front?
Well, first of all, it's indeed a challenge to administer these laws, because till date there is no precedent or no experience as far as the states and center are concerned of going together. And this is for the first time that this is happening. And in fact, the Finance Minister rightly put that there is an instance of cooperative federalism. Now, as far as the challenges are concerned, yes, there will indeed be challenges, and these challenges can be on two counts. One is that how far the states are willing to stick to whatever the GST Council has rolled out, has approved. And second would be that how far the ground level officers are in sync with what the senior officials or the GST Council has decided. Now, these are very critical aspects, and let me give you an example. In 2005, we had the model VAT laws, on the basis of which most of the states adopted it. Now, in Delhi, for an example, there was a particular difference between the VAT schedule as far as the comma is concerned. And that particular difference in comma led to a huge dispute as far as the taxation of digital cameras were concerned. When the matter came up in the High Court was actually constrained to ask the state government to get the original file on the basis of which the Delhi VAT Act was enacted. They found that this comma was inadvertently placed, and all the other states did not have this comma. And only because of this one particular comma, it led to a huge dispute, and unfortunately the state is still fighting it in Supreme Court. So those are the kind of realities which we must examine. One, that they must be in sync with what the GST Council decides. And second, and the most important part, the ground level officer who is involved in the actual implementation should agree and abide by the GST Council's decision in letter and spirit.
Well, these are small problems, Mr. Dua, but in reality they do exist and they create major hurdles in the future, and these need to be addressed. But on another note, I mean, can there be any further provisions that can be added so as to ensure that GST is implemented in the right way?
I think the 12th round of GST Council meeting, which ended yesterday, they've realized that. So they haven't actually gone down to fitting the, say for take the example of cess rates. They've talked of up to 15% cess on cars. At the same time, the finance minister, post the meeting, the union finance minister said, that's the limit, but actually today is 40% is the luxury car tax. So it's 28% they're falling in, it will be 12. This is more like an enabling 15%. We won't go over it. Another provision which there's the maximum rate of taxation should not exceed 40%.
40%, yes.
That's 28%. So these kind of enabling provisions they are imposing and or working out, I think as of now, there does seem to be inclination, and I would say perhaps it might happen that 1st July remains the deadline, no further. Because there is actually, if you give less time for lobbying, fitment rates, it will happen, there will be less actual extent of lobbying. You say 2 more months, 3 more months, that much more. Quite, in agreement with that comma anecdote which was mentioned there, that it did cause that confusion, etc. But, at the end of it, perfection is the enemy of good by itself. Something is happening. Probably the GST network is an issue, but if you just read the statements of the GST, the CEO yesterday, he says 71% of the companies have already registered. Of the 6.9 million companies, there are issues pertaining to regulations. 5 of those 9 regulations were finalized yesterday. 4 are due for the next meeting, which is as early as on the 31st of March, which hopefully might be the last meeting before the legislative exercise is completed.
Sure.
And the regulations. Thereafter, the third step is fitment, what rate goes, etc. I think it is possible. Overall, the issue is, as the GST network CEO said, 3 billion transactions a month would have to be recorded. It's unprecedented, probably anywhere in the world. And then he has also given that illustration, saying that in India, 50% of these will probably come on the last day, out of which another 50% of that will be in the last 4 hours.
Okay, I know everybody wants to come in and make a comment, but let me go to Mr. Chari first and then come back to you, Mr. Bhattacharya. Yes, Mr. Chari, I can see you raising your hand.
Yeah. No, you asked this question about the implementation process. I think any new tax structure and system is bound to have certain teething trouble, certain implementation problems. When VAT was sought to be introduced, the same thing was said, that India is a large country and then we are not prepared for all these things. So, with the onset of digital economy and with the onset of digitalization of the accounting and other processes, I think it will be much easier this time as far as the GST implementation is concerned. Of course, there will be certain grievances, there will be certain suggestions, and as we implement, sooner or later, I think we should all be able to stick to the July 1 deadline, except for Jammu and Kashmir, which has raised a genuine problem, but that can be sorted out. That's not a very important, very significant, but not a difficult problem. So I think if all the states go through, once we implement it, we can always give a window of 2 or 3 months of gestation period, after which it can be implemented properly, and then there are bound to be issues and problems which will be probably solved, and slowly the government will also initiate certain procedures whereby hand-holding will be done as far as the corporate or the business sector is concerned. Big corporates may not require, but small business units will require a number of hand-holding, which the government is ready and willing to do. So
sure.
I don't see any major problem as far as the implementation is concerned. Of course, there will always be minor problems which can be sorted out as it goes on.
Fair enough. I think that's a very fair way of putting it, and that's a very fair way of dealing with it, Mr. Bhattacharya. Problems will arise when you talk of a reform such as the GST. We'll deal with the problems as they come along.
Now, let me make just 2 quick points. One is, and broadly endorsing what Mr. Dua and Mr. Chari have said. Even on the question of fixing of rates, note that the Revenue Secretary has already made a public policy statement to the effect that the rates will be broadly in line with their current existing rates. If your current rate is 10%, then it will broadly come to the closest rate, that is 12%, that is the rate. So I think industry, the corporate sector, should also be under no illusion what will be the broad structure of the rates. It is just a matter of the officials committee will come and make that announcement. And the real issue would be, in my view, would be the applicability of the cess on the demerit goods. Now, the way I have seen it is this, that there is a cap on the cess on the demerit goods, which is a welcome move. But the problem will arise that this cess is levied because the states have to be compensated for their revenue loss, if any. And there is a sunset clause of 5 years, that after 5 years, there will be no compensation. So I am little puzzled by this cap, but the absence of no sunset clause in the cess rates. In my view, if the cess rate, if the cess rate is going to be so much, and the cap is 15% or 135% for tobacco items, then there should also be a sunset clause that after 5 years, those cesses cease to exist. So I think that's a point that needs to be considered.
Mr. Dua is interjecting. Yeah.
I was reading somewhere, they have authorized yesterday, the GST Council, levy of cess also for a period of 5 years, but said, I think I read somewhere, I have not seen the official statement, and that in case these have to be extended beyond 5 years, it will have to be brought back to the GST Council.
Yes, well, my understanding from the statement that has come out, the sunset clause is a very important clause, and it is not very clear that it automatically ceases to exist, because my sense is cess is a very retrograde kind of tax. it is stealing from the states. So therefore, the cess should have a clear sunset clause, which I don't see in the statement has it.
Okay,
That's my understanding.
Fair enough. Yes, Yatish.
So coming back to the earlier point, if you give lesser time to the corporates to lobby, the chances of them, getting that 9% adjusted downwards into 5% or getting it adjusted towards 12% is lesser. So if they don't put this deadline of July and stick to it, this hustle and between the government and the corporate sector is going to be higher only. So even if they have to do a trial run and they have to start that the first month first 15 days we are going to just do trial, they should stick to the deadline as July 1, and they can extend the trial run for a longer period, but they should not change the deadline at all.
Sure, fair enough. Yeah, fair enough. Tarun, Jain, as far as GST is concerned, are we in a position to roll out GST now as far as a major tax reform itself is concerned? Double taxation could also be a problem once GST is rolled out.
Correct. And in fact, this is a precise reason why GST has been introduced as a reform. Because till date, there is a complete segregation as far as the state and central taxes are concerned. And this has led to cascading effect, which has been well documented. And this is the reason why we are moving to a new reform regime. Now, having said that, one important thing which has to be examined here is that there are two limbs which are now walking in parallel, which is the state and the center. And they are actually implementing the same set of laws without any differentiation whatsoever. And therefore, it is important for them to work together for this reform to be successful. Having said that, there is one important aspect which must be examined, that these states form an amalgam, but they come with diverse and competing interests. And therefore, it will be essential for the council to take all of them through at the same level, irrespective of the differentiation of minor interests of some of these, let us say, originating states or states which are producing particular goods which are having a different uncompeting rates. So it is essential that these two work together, and more than that, it is all the more essential that these two have a cooperative attitude rather than having a confronting attitude. And if that happens, yes, indeed, what GST has been touted as a reform, it will actually turn out to be a reform.
Indeed. All right. So I've got 5 minutes left on the program. So what I'm going to do now is I've got 5 guests on the program. I'm going to give each one of you 1 minute each to give your concluding remarks. But, Mr. Doha, we've not spoken about the services sector and, and how the GST is going to have an impact on the services sector. Is there going to be one tax slab for all the services, or are we going to see multiple tax slabs for different kind of services?
As of now, there is no clarity on services. I must say
So when is that clarity going to come? After the next meeting?
No, they said we will be taking up this issue in addition to the 4 regulations in the meeting on 31st. That is yesterday's, one of the understandings reached yesterday. And second, it will be probably much greater clarity when the actual fitment exercise post 31st March commences. That certainly is still an outstanding issue.
Indeed. So services is still an outstanding issue, and that could be a major problem, Mr. Bhattacharya?
Yeah, it can be a problem, but my understanding is that it will be closer to the rate which currently is, which is 18%. But in services, as we know, that services you may say there is a one rate, but there are actually multiple rates in services because there is something called an abatement percentage. Every service that you are consuming, there is an abatement. And for example, when you go to a restaurant, the abatement rate is 65%. Now, when you go to something else, the abatement rate is something else. So, therefore, in reality, the rates will be many, but my understanding is, while it is not been fixed as yet, it will be closer to 18% rather than 12%, because already you're without the Swachh Bharat and Krishi cess, you have the service tax rate is around 14%.
Indeed. Mr. Chari, I mean, the first year after a major reform such as this, and several other countries too have rolled out similar schemes like the GST, have noticed that the first year is going to be the most difficult year. So are you prepared for any kind of eventuality as far as the GST itself is concerned once you roll it out?
Certainly, I'm sure the GST Council will look into all these problems because see, as someone was pointing it out, GST rate taxation has to be a dynamic one. You cannot have a fixed rate as of now because you have to first tackle a number of services, and then you have also to factor in the fact that there could be certain changes in the nature of services also. There could be some services could be clubbed together, some services could be new as far as the business community is concerned. So I think it has to be a dynamic approach, but we cannot have a flexible rate structure as far as GST is concerned. So we will have to take into consideration a fixed rate and then slowly move, either increase or decrease as we start rolling it out. And then there are certain states which are going to come out with certain other provisions. And then business community is always looking for avenues where they are able to maximize the profit by reducing the tax liability, and then they have to plan for the next, say, five years. If they have to do it, they will have to also look into those factors where their incidence of taxation does not vary very much.
Indeed.
So I think these are all the issues which not only the government is going to face, some of the issues that the business community is going to face, and after all, taxation is not a penalty. Taxation is what you pay to the government for the services that the government also offers inter alia to the people. So I think it has to be a joint effort.
Indeed, fair enough. Tarun, I'm going to come to you and ask you a question. As far as the GST itself is concerned, all this while it was a very political issue and only the political parties seem to be extremely interested in the GST. All of a sudden, over the last few months, we've seen that it's become a common man's issue, and even the common man is suddenly interested in the GST. So who stands to benefit the most from the GST, and how is it going to affect the common man?
Well, I think more than the common man, it is those people who are actually interacting with the common man. So here I mean the service providers and the businesses, because these are the people who, depending upon how the regulations play out, how the rates play out, they will decide that what would be the rate structure, the costing of the services and the goods which they are consuming. If they are ultimately in the line of reform, and in fact most of the businesses are actually looking GST as an opportunity to set their house in order, to get back to their pricing, their costing, and revamp entire business structures. If this happens, then obviously it is in the interest of businessman, but more than that, because the cost will come down, eventually the prices will get down, and this will be in the interest of the consumer.
Fair enough.
Yes, both the parties are involved, but it will eventually be the consumer who will get the benefit out of it.
Yatish, close the show for us with your concluding remarks.
So, I mean, this is a large tax reform. This is also going to have a very large impact on the businesses and the structure of the businesses, their supply chains, their warehouses, the location of their warehouses, the location of their manufacturing units, and there will be a consolidation in the business environment. The impact of this taxation will finally be borne by the consumer, and hopefully in some of the services industry, which Bhattacharya was saying about the abatement part, hopefully they'll start being a little bit more honest about paying the right service tax or the GST in this environment.
Indeed. All right. On that note, I'll have to call it a wrap on this edition of The Big Picture because we're completely out of time. A.K. Bhattacharya, Ajay, Seshadri, Chari, Yatish, Rajawat and Tarun, Jain. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for being with me on this edition of The Big Picture and putting things into perspective for us. That's all the time we have. See you again next time.